45 days of oil left. National emergency declared. Gas stations shuttered overnight. President Santos signed Executive Order 110, granting sweeping powers to the Department of Energy and military. Fuel rationing began, with energy prioritized for hospitals and food supply chains. For the first time in decades, the specter of nationwide blackouts felt real. The Philippines had only 45 days before the pumps ran dry. 45 days. That was the number stamped on every Filipino's mind. On April 2, 2026, the Department of Energy revealed the nation's oil stockpile, less than 7 weeks' worth of supply left. This was not a distant problem, it was a hard deadline. If nothing changed, motor vehicles would halt, hospitals would dim, and factories would stop. The crisis did not appear overnight. For months, oil imports had slowed as global prices soared, but now, the numbers were public. Gasoline stations began to close, one by one. The no fuel sign became a common sight, from Metro Manila to remote provinces. Diesel prices tripled, and basic goods followed. For many, the oil crisis felt like a slow-motion disaster. Commuters woke up earlier hoping to catch a ride before buses ran out of fuel. Fishermen stayed home, unable to afford the diesel for their boats. The middle class watched their savings vanish at the pump. Tension was everywhere. Every day, the sense of urgency grew. With only 45 days of oil left, the nation faced a stark choice: find a solution, or face a total shutdown. The root of the crisis lay far from the Philippines' shores. Early in 2026, Iran erupted into war. Oil tankers burned in the Persian Gulf. Insurance costs for shipping tripled overnight. The flow of oil from the Middle East slowed to a trickle. For a country like the Philippines, dependent on imported oil, this was a death sentence. Within weeks, world markets panicked. Oil shot past $200 a barrel. Diesel, the lifeblood of Philippine transport and agriculture, became nearly impossible to afford. The peso collapsed against the dollar, making imports even more expensive. The government tried to negotiate new supply deals, but so did every other country. The Iran war was not just a conflict over borders, it was a global energy earthquake, and the Philippines was near the epicenter of the aftershocks. Economists warned of food shortages, runaway inflation, and social unrest if the oil crunch continued. The message was clear. The war in Iran was not only a tragedy for the Middle East, its ripple effects had pushed the Philippines to the edge of a national emergency. As the Philippines reeled from its energy crisis, another threat emerged, this time from the sea. In the same week that Executive Order 110 was signed, Chinese Coast Guard and Navy vessels surged around the West Philippine Sea. Satellite images showed flotillas near Scarborough Shoal and Mischief Reef. Fishermen reported being chased away by Chinese patrols. Diplomats in Manila traded urgent messages with Beijing. China's foreign ministry insisted the patrols were routine, but the timing was clear. The Philippines was distracted, weakened, and vulnerable. In the past, such moves had been met with loud protests and naval deployments. This time, the response was muted. Manila could not afford a confrontation. The Chinese strategy was calculated. Instead of outright aggression, they tightened their grip quietly, expanding Coast Guard bases and holding drills. Chinese survey ships mapped out underwater resources. The message was unmistakable. China was watching, waiting, and ready to move if the Philippines faltered. For the Philippines, the timing could not have been worse. With energy supplies evaporating, there was little capacity left to defend its maritime claims. A nation facing one crisis can rally its people, but, two simultaneous emergencies can break even the strongest countries. Back in April 2026, the Philippines found itself squeezed from both sides, an energy crisis at home and growing pressure from China at sea. Every decision, honestly, became a trade-off. Should the military guard the oil depots or patrol the disputed reefs? Should politicians focus on emergency fuel imports or stand up to Chinese encroachment? For ordinary Filipinos, the threats merged into one overwhelming fear: the loss of both prosperity and sovereignty. The government's resources were stretched thin. Troops were deployed to secure vital infrastructure, leaving fewer ships to patrol the West Philippine Sea. Diplomats scrambled for foreign aid, but friends were, slow to respond. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with rumors of secret deals and looming invasions. The sense of double jeopardy was real. One crisis fed the other, making it almost impossible for leaders to focus or plan. Everyone knew history was full of nations that lost more than just oil in times of distraction. History is, honestly, a brutal teacher. Back in 1917, Germany lost key territory while reeling from fuel shortages and wartime chaos, and in 1979, Vietnam suffered border incursions while dealing with its own internal crisis. The lesson here is pretty clear. Nations that get distracted by one crisis often lose ground, both literally and figuratively, on another front. During World War II, countries that ran out of resources fell quickly to more prepared rivals. Even the mighty Soviet Union nearly collapsed in 1941 when German forces struck as food and oil ran low. In Southeast Asia, the 1970s showed how domestic instability opened the door to outside intervention. For the Philippines, these examples were not just stories, they were warnings. The risk wasn't only about losing access to oil, but also about losing control over land and sea. Foreign powers, honestly, know when to strike. They wait for that moment when a country is at its weakest and least able to respond. The message is chilling. When a country's attention is split between survival at home and threats from abroad, history shows the odds just do not favor the distracted. April 2nd, Executive Order 110 is signed. Oil reserves are declared. 45 days left. Panic buying erupts in Metro Manila. April 4th, first wave of gas station closures. Diesel prices hit 140 pesos per liter. Public transport fares jump 40%. April 7th. The peso falls to 75 per dollar. Importers warn of food price surges. Fishermen ground their boats. April 10th. Chinese patrols double near Reed Bank. Local mayors report confrontations with Chinese vessels. April 15th. Blackouts begin in rural Luzon as power plants switch to minimal operations. Hospitals receive emergency fuel shipments. April 18th. Government announces talks with Vietnam and Indonesia for emergency oil swaps. No deal reached. April 20th. Student protests erupt in Manila over fuel rationing. Food prices up 25% in just 2 weeks. April 25th. The military confirms a reduced naval presence in the West Philippine Sea due to fuel shortages. April 30th. Only 30 days of oil left. The crisis deepens. The peso tumbles further. China's ships remain. Each day brings new headlines. Each day the margin for error just shrinks. The Philippines lurches from one emergency to another, with really no end in sight. One fact really stands out: the Philippines has no strategic petroleum reserve. Unlike Vietnam and Thailand, who, stockpiled months of oil years ago, the Philippines lived hand to mouth. So when the crisis hit, there was nothing to draw on. Every single liter of fuel had to be found, bought, or begged for. Vietnam, facing the same global oil shock, was able to release reserves and stabilize prices. Thailand tapped its stockpile to keep food and medicine moving. The Philippines, by contrast, could only ration what little it had left. In hindsight, experts say this was a policy failure decades in the making. The lack of reserves magnified every problem. The government scrambled to arrange swap deals, offering agricultural exports in exchange for fuel. But neighbors, facing their own shortages, were in no mood to be generous. The Philippines' vulnerability was exposed for all to see. The lesson is harsh. Without a cushion, the country went straight from normal to desperate. The crisis was not only about oil, but about the ability to prepare and respond. Through it all, China's approach was cold and calculated. Beijing increased its patrols, filed diplomatic protests, and expanded its presence near disputed islands. But it stopped short of open conflict. Instead, Chinese officials issued offers of cooperation and joint development, with, plenty of strings attached. The message was clear. China was in no hurry. It watched as the Philippines struggled, waiting for the moment when desperation would force Manila to the negotiating table. The risk here wasn't an invasion, but a slow erosion of sovereignty. When energy runs out, even proud nations consider deals they once called unthinkable. For Filipinos, the choice is stark. Time is running out. The country must secure emergency imports, build a real oil reserve, and rally international support. Most of all, it must show that it can handle crisis without sacrificing its national interests. The world is watching, and China is watching most of all. The next 45 days are not just a countdown to empty pumps, they are a countdown for the nation's future.